right, it looks like we're at time, so let's go ahead and get started. Before I start with the Around the Valuation webcast today, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, to obtain CP credits during, oops, hold on one second. I just got an echo. My apologies for that. To obtain CP credit for today, you must answer all the poll questions that pop up on your screen during today's webcast. If you have a subscription to the Around the Valuation World, you'll receive the CP certificates within 7 to 10 business days after today's broadcast. With ABW, try to go over all the hot topics in the industry. With the 2 hours that we have, we're able to cover all of the information. So there are some links to some additional resources where you can visit and obtain some more information regarding different topics in the industry. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Mel, who will get us started with the webcast today.
Thank you, Chinda. So good to be here, and welcome to the September program of AVW. We got another one that is packed for us. Janae Castell is going to kick us off with industry headlines. These are hot topics that she's going to highlight and then give you the resources so you can go deeper. And then she's going to stay on to have a conversation with Simon Rubinsohn, which is always enlightening about the economic updates and everything. I'd love to see what he's got to say in this one. And then we'll go into Melissa Gragg, which will start to talk about the idea of future valuation and mediation and not litigation and everything. And then we have industry and expert insights around bias and objective nature of the expert witness with Dimitri and Yinga, who's going to interview Robin Hazel and Gregory Reagan. And then Melissa is going to come back, unless she gets called to trial, to spend a little time talking with our judges and our judges panel, which is always a highlight around AI and things like that. And then we'll close it off with Nick Mears talking a little bit about an update of standards, and Alan Zipp with David Fein about growing and building your practice. So with that, Janae will take us from here to talk about some of the hot topics that are going on. She's been in the valuation world for many, many years, and she's a CVA and MAFF. And Janae, welcome back to AVW. So good to have you here, and I'll let you take it away.
Great. It's good to see you all. It's good to be back after conference. So some of you I may have seen at conference. The rest of you, it's good to have you back on the webinar. Okay, so the articles that we'll be discussing this month include the BVR conference reveals the latest thinking on DLOM from BV Update, unimpeachable AI guardrails from the Quick Read by Zach Myers, factors to be considered in setting compensation from the Quick Read by Stephen Kirkland and William Phelps. Tougher Rule 702 surfaces in the Zantac case from the BV Wire. Another article from the BV Wire, a book presents new approaches to business valuation. And finally, updated, BVR's fingertip guide to goodwill in divorce. Meanwhile, in contrast to the 702 case, there was another BV Wire article from July 30th that you might take a look at with claims against a court-appointed receiver and administrator, which were dismissed, highlighting some of the protections for court-appointed experts who act within the scope of their court-approved duties. Okay, so our objectives and main takeaways for this month, some things that we'll be touching on, are suggestions for the latest thought leadership on DLOMs, exploring the creation of effective guardrails for AI usage in our profession, what's needed and what's problematic. U.S. courts have established multiple factors and guidelines for reasonable compensation. Courts are applying stricter gatekeeping functions to ensure that expert opinions are both relevant and scientifically reliable before reaching the jury. A new book presents updated qualitative models for traditional valuation methods, and a long-standing personal goodwill resource is newly updated. So, BVR conference on DLOM. There were multiple sessions which emphasized overlaying quantitative data over qualitative insights, so using both. Pat Raffanelli cautioned about a false sense of precision and cross-examination woes inherent in factor-based scoring systems. William Harris suggested the use of implied volatility as an alternative to traditional historical volatility in the inputs for some of the DLOM models. William Harris noted the higher return volatility experienced by smaller, less liquid companies and drew estimates from the Kroll size premium. Bruce Johnson made a compelling case for DLOMs. According to the article, Bruce Johnson backed up his position on DLOMs for controlling interests with detailed analysis of empirical evidence, practical transaction examples, and academic studies, including merger arbitrage research. Mike Gregory referenced the job aid and newer models, which are still maybe gaining traction, including the VFC DLOM calculator, the NICE model, and the CRISP model. So if you haven't heard about those are maybe some models that you want to go look at, evaluate, see what you think in your practice. The article didn't mention Ashok Abbott's new DLOM calculator, but that may also be something that you look in and kind of start testing it and see what you think. Michael Gregory suggested presenting multiple DLOM models in separate paragraphs, so a separate paragraph for each, with a clear explanation of the model's rationale. Finnerty's original model was more theoretical, and he presented a revised version of his option pricing model, which was largely empirical. He said it was just a simple little equation. Okay, that's good or bad. That's up to you to decide. Okay, our next article is on AI guardrails from Zach Mears. The function facing us as valuation professionals is, what is the function of a guardrail? And even if we follow all the right protocols, unexpected events or risks can appear or dart into our lane. And so what do we do? How do we manage those risks? And how do we put guardrails in place? How do we keep those guardrails from becoming, he said, launch pads into unintended consequences? He gave a story about flipping his car when a deer came into his lane. It's interesting story. He's back. He's okay. But he does talk about professional standards that are not meant to eliminate risk, but they mitigate the consequences when the unexpected happens. So I don't know that Zach's intent would be for the reader to take one side or the other in an argument on AI guardrails or rules or ethics. But I think he'd rather, and I'm speaking for Zach, and so maybe his next article will be, the unimpeachable AVW review of articles. But I believe that he would want us to consider the thought experiment and allow that to color your opinions with a little bit of nuance. There were several scenarios proposed about AI guardrails and ethics. And I just think it was interesting. He proposed, okay, well, point, counterpoint. And to me, it brought up the quote from H.L. Mencken that you probably heard some variation of, there's always a well-known solution to every human problem, neat, plausible, and wrong. He mentioned that the risk is that not that AI will become too powerful, but that professionals will stop asking if they should intervene. And he brought up, principles-based standards and principles being key in complicated or novel situations. They don't tell you, how to drive, but they do keep you on the road if something happens. So consider these questions. What would you want to see in an AI augmented valuation world? What would make you trust the result? And what role should professional standards play in creating that trust? All right, Stephen Kirkland's article on reasonable compensation discussed a couple of cases, the first one being the 1949 Mason manufacturing decision. And the factors for considering if compensation was reasonable or not included, qualifications, economic conditions, policy for the employer for all the employees in comparison, with gross and net income, as well as a comparison to distributions. In 1984, the Elliott's decision in the Ninth Circuit discussed 5 primary factors: the role of employee, external comparisons, company character and condition, conflicts of interest, so that hypothetical independent investor test that you may have heard about, and internal consistency. He did warn that you need to be careful that the difference in compensation is not based on, some of these prohibited factors. If a wage differential is based on certain factors such as merit or seniority system, there may be an exception to, having some of these there being pay differences across some of these different characteristics. Okay. The tougher rule on 702. 702 changes were meant to strengthen the gatekeeping function where courts were tending to allow experts to testify and then determining the weight to afford their testimony. So this Delaware Supreme Court case reversed the trial court, saying their basis for admitting the expert was faulty. The Supreme Court ruling focused on the expert's opinion meeting the evidentiary threshold for causation. You know, the court had been basically presumptively allowing the testimony to be admissible, and the Supreme Court was like, nope, go back, you've got to be stricter. Is this surprising? No, probably not really, but how many of us have heard, well, I'll allow the testimony and decide the weight I will afford it, or decide the weight to be afforded to it. So perhaps pay attention to your methodologies and assumptions and button them up just a little bit, and be aware that some of this is coming through. The new book presenting new approaches to business valuation is available on Springer and Amazon. There'll be a link at the back of this presentation. The formulas are based on the Brusov-Filatova-Orakova theory, which is relatively new within the last 20 years. So be aware that it hasn't gained widespread adoption, perhaps due to the complexity and lack of empirical validation to date. But if this book gains traction, more practitioners and academics may begin testing it, and we'll see if it stands. If you're interested, you can purchase it for about $100. Again, the link at the back of the presentation. Either way, be aware that it's out there and challenging some of the tenets of traditional valuation models and theorems, maybe especially assumptions about finite-lived companies, okay? So challenging that perpetuity model. All right. BVR has updated their Goodwill Hunting and Divorce resource. It's available as a free download. It looks at how courts in each state have handled personal goodwill and marital dissolution cases. Specifically, it was developed by Jim Allarding and Stacy Udell. So here are the links to everything that I've discussed so far. The only thing that's not up there is the BV Update link, the article from BV Update on the DLOM conference. If you would like a copy of that, you'll have to go to BVR or maybe subscribe to BV Update. Here are the articles that we go through. If you have thoughts of things that you want me to cover in the future, or things that you see that are interesting, I would love for you to reach out and share that with me. So that is that first session. Now, as Mel mentioned, I'm going to jump right into an interview with Simon Rubinsohn. Make sure you get that poll. Those polls come up after each of the segments. So grab your attendance poll. And Simon, if you're there, we're looking forward to hearing about the global economics.
Hi.
Great update. How are you doing?
How are you doing?
Good.
Good.
Well, is the world on fire?
Is the world on
Has it all
fire?
burned down yet?
Well, as we've discussed, I mean, I think that there were, and I probably fueled some of this expectation about a fire, but as we can all see from the numbers that are coming in, and I'm sure you're all aware from the news flow, and also from the business that you're doing, the numbers are proving more resilient. The US economy is proving more resilient. I would say the global economy is proving more resilient than some had feared. And I don't like using that word "some" because I think I ought to lump myself in that group.
Absolutely. So that's interesting. The growth has softened, like you said, and you've got on the slides, but it wasn't really more than what was expected. Why do you think that we haven't seen those drastic effects, especially from things like the trade wars? That I think it was prudent. I think kind of the economic theory and everything pointed to this should be disruptive. So why didn't we see those drastic effects that we expected and were warned about?
Yeah, look, I think last time we spoke together on this presentation, on this session, that I was certainly warning about it, and I was looking at sort of some of the uncertainty indicators, and they were sort of sounding alarm bells, really, and you could see why. And historically, it was right to be cautious. I think it's fair to say it's still early days. Although there was a big fanfare in April around the tariffs, in truth, a lot of them, have been going backwards and forwards. There's been negotiations, the implementation has been delayed. And if we were to look at the hard data, a lot of hard data still is referencing August. We're only in September, so we'll be referencing August. It may, in some cases, be referencing July. And the tariffs really were only coming in to play in many cases in August. But alongside that, for all the talk about big numbers, and in some cases, clearly there are some big numbers, at stake here, perhaps the actual level of tariffs hasn't been quite as high as was feared in many cases. And, if I think of, perhaps one of your, closest trading partners, Canada, or certainly for them, a big trade, US is a very big trading partner. I mean, I was reading some research today which said that they estimated the effective tariff rate on Canadian goods was going to be about 6%. Now, obviously, there are going to be some commodities and some goods where it's a lot higher, but it's sort of balanced because of a lot of compliance with the US, Mexico, and Canada agreements. So there are other dynamics going on there which make it perhaps the headlines perhaps are giving a slightly misleading picture. I would also, I'm going to make two other quick points. One is there's probably been some front loading of trade as well, trying to get in before the tariffs came on board, which means that some of those first half numbers were probably a bit stronger than they might otherwise have been. Yeah. And of course, tariffs are being absorbed in different parts of the supply chain. So, it's not all going in one place, and that's sort of helping to sort of mitigate perhaps some of the direct impact. But if I just finish on one point here, I was looking at some sort of some consultancy work today around global GDP. And look, these are big numbers and, who knows what the numbers are going to be in the end. But the forecasts for this year are around 2.5% for global, not the US. And for next year, they're forecasting generally around the same sort of area. Now, when they put that in context, they said, if you have 2 years of 2.5%, that's the first time we've had such low growth on the 2-year period since 2009. So since the aftermath of the global financial crisis, stripping out, of course, 2020, which was a COVID year. So what they're sort of saying is, look, this is, it's not as bad as it could have been by any stretch of the imagination. But, the global economy is struggling for traction. It's not all down to tariffs by any stretch of the imagination, but let's not pretend that we're seeing, a booming picture either. There are some big challenges out there, and tariffs and protectionism and trade is just one of those issues which is adding to, perhaps not the source of, but adding to this level of uncertainty.
Okay. Actually, I don't know if you want to take a look at the question in the chat. It's interesting. I'm with Mel. So Mary asked about gross national product, GNP, and it not being used. And that's true. Like Mary said that, I was like, oh yeah, GNP. I haven't heard from that for a while. I know it's been replaced by GDP, but
I think that GNP is still, I see it computed. I just don't think, it includes another layer of capital flow, which I think in terms of trying to understand what's happening in terms of the domestic activity is probably less relevant. Now, I'm actually trying to think whether it is computed in the US. I don't know. I think it probably is, but I can double check that and get back to you. But certainly I've seen it used in other countries, but it's just it's never as widely used these days as a measure of policy and a metric for valuing the output of an economy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I'm sure it's calculated. It's just not, it's not in the headlines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Good question. So we've looked, when looking at some indices like the volatility index, the VIX, they indicate a picture that might be less bleak, like we've been talking about before. But what does the volatility index and that, maybe the less bleakness, or that maybe the investor expectations are maybe a little bit more stable than what we feel like, what does that mean for the economic picture? More, I mean, obviously, you know, it indicates some stability, but what do you take from those kinds of measures, and how do you apply them when we're looking forward to seeing where we think things are going to go?
Well, in a way, obviously, the VIX is indicative of what's happening in the market, so one can get a pretty good handle on the VIX by looking at what the market moves are. That's all it's telling us. Clearly, there was a lot of volatility earlier in the year. Clearly, it's settled down, and markets seem to be in a decent place at the moment. And I suppose if I was looking at, I'll just go back to that previous slide because I mentioned there. The issue around business investment. And I mean, perhaps we were again thinking, how would businesses react against the environment of, the uncertainty of tariffs, amongst other factors. Well, so far, and obviously the data is often, quite backward looking. We're looking at second quarter numbers. There are some metrics trying to capture sort of where things are going. But, in terms of the data, we've got the hard data. The numbers are suggesting that business investment has actually been quite strong. Now, that may not come as a surprise for many of people like yourselves who are working in the businesses, and you can see what's going on an ongoing basis. But it's quite clear in the hard data that I tend to look at, which may be rear view mirror and the rest of it. But it's not just the US. I mean, in the UK as well, we've been surprised by the strength of the numbers. And obviously, technology is playing a big focus. I mean, you talked in your previous session a bit about AI and guardrails, but, getting up to speed and on technology and putting yourself in the right place is clearly a big driver. And if we look at how markets have rebounded and who are the leaders there, again, we can see a lot of the tech stocks sort of still having quite a bit of momentum. So I would align the two things. Alongside that, I mean, I think it's fair to say that you look at other policy levers, fiscal policy, the US and elsewhere generally is pretty supportive. It's a lot of talk about problems, but at the moment, governments around the world seem to be still sort of quite happy to use their fiscal lever. And in a way, monetary policy has also been quite supportive. I know in the US, there's obviously a big debate. We're going to come and talk about it. I mean, it's actually the same in the UK. But if you look at Europe, for example, the ECB rates are probably half where they were, 12 months ago. So, you're actually looking at what is a reasonably supportive policy environment for now. Now, obviously, being an economist, you would expect me to always have a slightly, a caveat somewhere. And of course, I will do, because I look at public debt levels, and I'm sure many of your listeners in today would say the same thing. And, we're all a bit concerned about government borrowing. I know that the president's concerned about government borrowing in the US. And I know, many governments around the world are similarly. It's very difficult to take the actions to rein in debt levels. Politics makes it incredibly difficult. So I have as an economist, I'm keeping a watchful eye on that. And secondly, we can't ignore inflation. We haven't talked much about it. It's still there. It's not, accelerating. In the US, last week's numbers were sort of so. Probably, I've seen people interpreting them both ways. On balance, I think they were probably slightly negative, but very slightly. Inflation may edge up a bit more over the coming months because of the tariffs feeding through. But it seems that, for the time being, it's going to remain in that same sort of area, that band. Not a major issue just yet, but something, you can't ignore when it's above target, and you just got to keep an eye on it. And there's always a risk that, policymakers are, beginning to focus on something else. And I think we might want to talk about that now.
Yeah, sure. I will take you back just a second. Sorry, but you're talking about some of the returns and the business investment. I think it's interesting to note, we've been talking some recently, actually the last several years, but especially in the conference, and some of the experts were talking about private equity and a lot of the dry powder that's been in there in private equity firms, and the funds are starting to close down. And so they've got to take deals that may not be the best deals and returns that they were looking at before, but they've got to, employ this capital. And Laurie had mentioned, corporate share buyback. So I think it's interesting, we've got, this environment of, okay, there's more investment, but we're looking at, okay, this is kind of signaling that corporations are saying, I don't know that there's much externally that we should be investing in, which on one hand can be negative, but on the other hand, if you're investing in yourself, like, if you think that you're the best investment, that's another signal. So I don't know that we need to comment on those, but I think it's just an interesting overall.
It is an interesting point, but I mean, absolutely. And we periodically have this conversation when share buybacks are really visible in the markets. But it's also the case at the moment that one can certainly see a technology-driven sort of capex side to things as well. So I mean, I would take on. I think there are two levels to this, but I don't think one's at the expense of the other at the moment.
Okay. Well, interesting. Thank you. And we will talk about interest rates. So would you like to take a wager on if it's going to be a 25 basis point or 50 basis point rate cut this next week for the Fed?
Sadly, as economists, or as an economist, one has to take a wager. As all participants on this call probably realize, most economists' wagers aren't worth the paper they're written on or the amount of money they're putting down on the table to make that bet. But look, for what it's worth, I would probably say 25 this time, but as part of a process. It's quite clear, and I'm sure, again, you and most other people on this call will have seen how the balance has shifted in terms of the way the messaging from the Fed has come out in between, labor market and inflation. There's been clearly a shift. And it's understandable. I think it is very justifiable. It's obvious that there's been a bit of a political debate about the role of the Fed and how the Fed executes policy. But what we have seen over the last month or two is that labor market shift, which I think is now credible as a basis for making a move. So I mean, we're going to get a rate cut. I would still go for a quarter this time. I see this as part now of a process. I think that, even with inflation a little bit above target, the direction of travel is there. I take on board the comment that the Fed chair is stubborn. I mean, look, as an economist, one might say Fed chairs or Bank of England, chairs or whatever, perhaps their job is partly to be stubborn and be pushed, I mean, I don't have a problem with that, providing they weigh up the evidence fairly in the end and make a decision based on, what is the emerging evidence. So I think it's reasonable to assume that we're going to see the direction of travel now. I suggested equilibrium, rate of 3%. Whether we get there is, obviously will depend on events. But I don't see any reason why, if the background remains fairly steady like this, that we won't move much closer to that level. I mean, one headline I did see today, just as an aside, was a reference to a previous Fed chair. And this is the headline was, the Fed is set to add more punch to the bowl. You may remember the old comment about the Fed's job is to take away the punch bowl when I think before the party gets going too rapidly anyway. So an interesting, there are clearly those out there who wonder whether this is the right time to be throwing more punch in the bowl. I'm not in that camp, by the way.
Okay. No, I think you're not going in too much on a limb.
Yeah.
With those expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So what are the yield curves currently indicating about the economy's health? Anything that we should be keeping our eye on?
I just thought I would highlight, I think it's worth highlighting what's going on in the yield curves. We have seen a steepening. Actually, I noticed a real beginning, a divergence between the US and, say, Europe over the last couple of weeks, where the US curve is steady, but actually, if anything, it's narrowing a bit. It's actually beginning just to tighten up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I think that's partly a combination of, one, you've got interest rates. Interest rates are pulling the short end down, but I think there's a bit more confidence about the longer term inflation outlook. I think that while supply, is going to keep term premiums, perhaps a little bit more extended than they were going back sort of 6 months, a year ago, maybe there's a recognition that there is, some potential, and there's clearly a lot of debate about this, that, some of the measures, including the tax bill, could actually be supportive of reducing the debt over the medium term. Clearly, that's a source of great debate, and a political debate as well as an economic one. But if it were to be a signal of that, that would obviously be quite encouraging. And as I say, you can see from the 10s to the 2s, it's coming a bit already, and it's coming a bit more since I put that chart together. In Europe, the picture isn't quite as clear cut, actually.
So we have one very interesting but very specific question. And then Mary is recognizing, that the rates, I don't know, does that really say the rates are going to fall, or just that they're not going to be, quite so elevated? And I think those are different expectations. What's your thought on her
Sorry, I missed that
interpretation?
one. Sorry, I was just looking. Sorry, could you just say that again?
Said that says the market is expecting rates to fall, or she said it's twisted. That says the market is expecting rates to fall. Okay, I see. Okay, twisted, not just okay.
Well, I think the market the market is expecting rates to fall. Absolutely. I mean, that's why the short end is, obviously rallying. So yeah, absolutely, the market is betting on that, and as you can see, the 2-year is down at 3.5, which effectively, and probably a bit lower now, actually, I should say. So it's indicative of average over the next 2 years, the interest rate averaging around that level. Well, given we're talking about a rate above 4% at the moment, that would probably be indicative of rates going down to the 3% area that I sort of suggested, because this is obviously a 2-year average.
Right.
Daily rate compounded over 2 years.
Okay. So anything further that these factors mean for Fed policy?
Well, I just wanted to I think I used this last time, but I think it just reiterates the point I've made. This looks at the 10-year yield and breaks it down between the break-even inflation and the implied real yield. And the break-even inflation has actually been pretty steady, a little bit above the target, but it's sort of in that sort of 2 to 2.5% area still. But if you look at the implied real yield, that has come in quite significantly. And I think that's consistent with the idea that while growth isn't, really contracting in a major way, it is relatively sluggish, and reflecting probably a broader global macro picture, which I've already referenced, but it sort of points to justification. It provides cover for the Federal Reserve to cut rates, because it's saying inflation a little bit above target, but what's quite clear is that the implied real yield, which is sort of giving us a bit of a proxy for the outlook for growth, actually is slipping back a bit. So it's justifying some move on the part of the Fed.
Great. Okay, one little comment, and we've got just a couple minutes left, kind of overarching a lot of this discussion. So there was a quote from Professor Denise Lively on a review, actually, of UK data and statistics, talking about statistics we can trust are essential for a healthy society as they help to ensure well-informed decisions, and that official statistics also serve to empower, enabling citizens to call governments to account and providing a window on society. As such, they're an indispensable part of a democratic society. We've seen a lot about data and its reliability, and it's important for decision making for investors and businesses. We know that forecasts are not perfect, and even perfect historical data doesn't perfectly predict future periods and trends. But still, with a lot of this news on data collection in the BLS and criticism even on the UK side, it's not just in the BLS. What are we to make of the problem, and any quick potential solutions?
Look, I think that the non-farm payrolls, I've always been amused by this, because going back to the time when I used to work in the financial services industry, Friday lunchtime, we would all roll back very early, because this was the big data point of the month to watch. And we knew its failings, but everybody paid attention to it. It was the number. And about 30 years later, it is still the number. And I'm sort of surprised that, given that we know that there's revisions, given we know there's a benchmarking exercise, that we haven't learned that, overreaction to an initial data point is high risk. But as you rightly point out, this is not just a US problem. In the UK, we've got a number of statistics, including employment, which is no longer got the certificate around it as a national statistic. So, there's real issues around how we actually capture what's going on. In the UK, they're talking about using tax data to try and build up a better picture of what's happening in the employment. I know in the US, you've got different methodologies. You've got your household survey that supplements the non-farm payrolls, but it's a real challenge. Statistical agencies are trying to do too much, I would say. They probably should narrow their focus, do a little less, and spend a little bit more time doing it.
Okay, that's great. Great insights, and I appreciate it. Sorry for running just a minute over, but Simon, you're great. Thanks so much.
Great to talk to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your session, everyone.
Likewise.
Thank you, Janae and Simon. Great as always. So now we have our next polling question, so make sure that you respond to that. And our next session, we have Melissa Gragg, one of our correspondents, and she's going to be talking Anchor the Deal. The future of valuation is mediation, not litigation. So Melissa, it's great having you here. You can take it from here.
All right. So hopefully this is sharing my screen for the presentation. And today I just want to give you, so I've been doing mediation for about the better part of the last 10 years. And one of the things that I have noticed is that, there's a misunderstanding about what mediation looks like as a valuation expert and how the litigation and mediation is starting to come together. So, initially we have how AI is shifting this space, and I think it's impacting everything. But what it's creating is that a lot of people are starting to use AI to say, what is the value of my business? And you can also look at it from the perspective of, there's a lot of softwares out there and people are creating new softwares every day that have AI components or that are apps that in some capacity are kind of black box calculations of evaluation. And that's always been an issue with, as a valuation expert, how do you combat when an AI product could, spit out a valuation for $100 or $500, and what we're doing could cost 5, 10, 15, 20,000. So I just want to present kind of a concept of how you can, as a valuation expert, your skill set and your capabilities are very much needed in the mediation space. And even taking it one step further, that judges and lawyers really don't understand business valuation. And even as we go and offer our expertise into the judicial community as testifying experts, the reality is we're just dueling experts, and two experts are coming into litigation and kind of fighting and duking it out about the value. And quite frankly, if you ask the rest of the audience whether they understand what we're fighting about, they typically don't. And so I think as we move into AI, and I'll give you an example of how this happened, that we're really fighting about things that people don't understand. And so if we start to, as valuators, shift into a space where we are actually the people that are educating everybody about the value of the business or the range of value for the business, how does that look as like a joint valuator or a neutral valuator? And then how do we layer that into mediation? And right now you have a system that, the court system is kind of broken and not really giving great results. And you have, the metrics are still there that 90+% of cases settle outside of court. So how are they settling, and how are we kind of helping the system? Because at the end of the day, the people are who are paying us to fight in the system. And so I wrote a book called Anchor the Deal to really talk about divorce and partner disputes, and how in these two situations, they are closed environments of negotiation. And so in a lot of situations, the couple or the partners are not getting adequately taken care of in the court system. And so valuation is no longer just like a number that you can submit a report and people can understand what you're talking about. They really want it explained clearly. And so I think it gives us the capability to kind of be that middle portion. And I'll give you one example. There was a strategic client that I was working with that they're going to receive an offer for their business. And so they wanted to know what the value of the business. Now, before that, the person who brought me in was a their financial advisor professional. And that person said, so I always meet with them and kind of give them, here's kind of where the value is, what other conversations did you have with it? And immediately the financial professional was like, well, we sort of ran the valuation through one of those black box apps or softwares, and it came up with the value of 6 million. And you're telling me that the value is closer to 3.5 million. So we're going to have to deal with how to explain to them why the value is not 6 million. And I was like, hold on. You had that conversation with them. And so if you take that conversation, I'm really coming in as a sanity check, right? I'm coming in to verify what the market really will bear in the valuation of this company. The same with divorce. Do you think that a couple really wants to pay for two parties to value this business and then pay for them to be deposed, pay for them to, fight about this, pay for the attorneys to not understand the nuances of the valuation? And I think that we can move into a position where we're educating everyone, maybe outside of court. And what this does is give an opportunity to people who maybe were only thinking that you could be an expert witness and didn't like being an expert witness. Like it's painful at times. Like right now, I'm waiting to be called to court and still, having to be functional in other capacities. So if you didn't like litigation, mediation is really a place where you could take and mediate the valuation. So that could look like you're a joint valuator. It could look like you are really advocating on behalf of the company. And so it's just like you have a fiduciary responsibility to come in and value the company based on the company hiring you. And now you're either explaining it and walking through with a couple or a partnership, right? One's buying the other out, because those are the two areas that we see the most involvement from a litigation sense for our work, and especially around a business valuation, is partnerships are breaking up and they're suing each other, or a divorce and they own a business within it. And so in moving from being a paid hired gun, which of course nobody would say that that's what they are when they're testifying in court, but that's the perspective or the perception of everybody else when you have two valuators that are $1 million or $2 million apart. You have kind of the situation. And so it's really, how do you work with them? And one of the things in mediation that we've been able to do, and we probably do several mediations a week, and so we have the capability to see what works and what doesn't work. But a lot of times it's first working with the valuation and working with the couple so that you're exposing what the perception is of each person. And a lot of this comes down to how you discuss cash flow, right? Because the valuation metrics or the cap rate or the market multiples are all going to be in your valuation discretion. But at the end of the day, where they really disagree is in the cash flow. And that's because in both of these types of disputes, either in a partner dispute or a divorce, the cash flow is kind of overshadowed with personal benefit of that cash flow. So in either situation, well, we've been running the cars and the phones and all of this stuff through the business, and I want you to now rip that off and really focus on valuing the business based on what the cash flow would be without those adjustments. And so when you're like the neutral party in this conversation, one of the things that you have to spend a lot of time on is being very clear. Like you're now an advocate for how the numbers can or cannot be used against the other side. So you're exposing all of the issues with the cash flow or all of the issues that you see in the historical results. And therefore, you're bringing them to light, but you're also allowing them to be discussed. Like there's a lot of perceptions about the business if you're the partner that had control or you're the partner that didn't have control. And so a lot of it is starting to get an agreement of where they see the future cash flow going, right? And that's based on the past, based on what their perceptions were for that cash flow, and then kind of talking them through that range of value. So it really does allow you to sit in the middle. And then if you talk through a lot of the assumptions, a lot of what you perceive, ask a lot of questions about the results, but ask them with both people or all partners there so that they can say, well, that's not what I thought happened. I thought that this is what happened. So you kind of have this transparency and a discussion about the cash flow. Because at the end of the day, you might be providing a cap rate that you believe is justifiable or a market multiple that you believe is justifiable. But also, buyers are looking at cash flow, and cash is king. And so how do you get two warring parties? You obviously know one wants to make the cash flow high and one wants to make the cash flow low. But a way in mediation is we have those discussions in the light of day. And so that everybody can see what each side kind of has a perspective on, and you start to get information. So the other day we did a mediation where we did the valuation, we did a range of value, and then each party can come in and say, well, if it was more on my side, what would that number be? So then they kind of establish what their numbers would be if they changed all of the inputs. Now, when we came back at the end of the day, there was a settlement offer that said, we believe that, Melissa, you did the right job and that the value is at $1 million. And how could it be any less? Because they bought this business for $900,000 6 years ago. Now, that was never discussed in any of the conversations, and that was by the one partner that wasn't in control. So I went back to the other partner and said, hey, we're not going to be able to settle this because they perceive that this was bought for $900,000 even 6 years ago. And they were like, no, it was never bought for $900,000. It was bought for $300,000. Now, again, both people have a perception of what that was purchased back in the day, and it's clouding their perception, even if we did the valuation correctly or very transparently. They disagreed from a general standpoint, and a lot of expenses were being run through the business. So when we peeled them all off and made some rational adjustments, it was $1 million. At the end of the day, it was actually purchased for $300,000, and we were able to get the bank to provide that documentation within the mediation. But that expectation could have been enunciated throughout the process, right? But they held it back because they wanted to kind of use it against each other. But the information was wrong. And so that's what you're really trying to expose is what does this look like? Now you can take it one step further and understand that a lot of times in both of these situations, money is the biggest thing that they're arguing about. And it's contingent upon the value of that business. Now, after you value the business, and you can put that in the marital balance sheet, or you can discuss it from a partnership dispute, there could still be other factors involved. Like, great, thanks for the business value, but they also owe me money from, like a bonus that I never received, or, that owner got more perquisites than I got and we need to fix it. So you're coming in as this neutral mediator, and again, just exposing the issues and talking it through. Now, obviously, you have to have an understanding of what actually happens in court, but you don't have to have all the legal understanding. Legal, mediation can be facilitated by attorneys as well, or both of your clients could have attorneys, and you're really the neutral mediator in the middle that understands business valuation. Most of the people that are doing divorce or partner disputes have a general knowledge of finance, but they have no clue about the ins and outs of the business valuation. And so that's where you have this capability of kind of coming in and being the sanity check. You know, everybody's coming in with values in their head based on things that didn't exist, and you're kind of pulling them in to be somewhere neutral in the middle. Hey, Mel, what's going on? Do I have questions that I've been ignoring?
No. I think we're at time.
Okay, well,
But I love this conversation. Let's finish up. I don't want you to just cut off. Let's just close it out.
Well, I mean, I think that what we're typically doing is you have to, if you understand the valuation and you can start to put yourself in the neutral mediator shoes, you have a capability of being a mediator. I mean, it takes 40 hours of training to become a mediator. What you really have is you have the capability to educate them on the finances. Do you have the ability to educate them on how this works in a marital balance sheet? And again, you're not giving them what to do. You're helping them identify options. And a lot of times, lawyers don't understand the nuances of the financials to give those options. And so this is a very lucrative space. I think that as AI comes in to kind of take the value or even do what lawyers do, it's harder for AI to mediate an emotional issue around money and come in with a very clear head and expose how somebody could manipulate the other. For the most part, if you have lawyer mediators, manipulation happens and nobody has a clue. Whereas you would be like, sorry, that's not how it works. Sorry, this is a double dip. This is why we can't do it this way. And you have the capability to also recalculate it if there were two valuators, and you could actually be in the middle and mediate those valuation issues. So it's just one kind of step, I think. Yeah. So
it's a great opportunity for us as a profession to take our skill set and put us in a position where we're not going to get outsourced or technology is not going to take our spot.
Well,
so.
And even in litigation, we can't do a lot of things that we can do in mediation. Like I record all of our mediations. We have video documentation of our process throughout so that we now are teaching mediators how to do some of this. And what I'm encouraging is valuators need to step into this space because it's the missing link. Like everybody can separate or tax affect a retirement plan. Okay, that's math, right? The valuation piece is the most manipulated piece. And so when we come in as mediators, we're recording our sessions so that everybody can go look back, and we have less disputes because they can go watch it 3 times because they didn't understand it the first time. And then we come back to the mediation and kind of work it through. It's very lucrative. There is a process. Reach out to me if you have some questions or you want this as sort of another thing that you could do on the side.
So good. Thank you so much, Melissa. This is fascinating, and I think that is something we should be looking into. So awesome. We're going to move into the next segment, and the next segment is with Dimitri Yinga is going to be interviewing Robin Hazel and Gregory Reagan, and going to be talking about avoiding bias and remaining objective as an expert witness. I think it's kind of like this shift from what we just talked about, mediation and everything here. So Dimitri, I'm going to let you introduce your guests and we'll take it from here.
Thanks, Mel, and thanks everyone for being here with us. So yes, today we're about to cover a topic that we are all very familiar with, or should be. And to talk to us about it is Gregory Reagan, who is the CPA, CFF, ABV, CFE, and CVA. He's the managing director of Reagan FVL LLC, a Charlotte, North Carolina forensic accounting firm providing service primarily to the Southwestern U.S. Greg, thank you for being with us today and sharing with us this knowledge. And I know we have a little bit of time left, so I'm just going to let you go through and yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate that. I have Robin Hazel here with me. Something went wrong with our slide deck. We don't have any of her information in here, but Robin's been working with me for about 3 years. I tell everybody she's my right arm. She's a manager managing most of our projects here with the things that we do
Oh,
and
great.
expert witness work, valuing businesses, doing damage determinations, forensic accounting, just if it involves money and somebody thinks something's wrong, that's kind of what we get thrown into. So we want to talk today about a subject that's near and dear to our hearts, which is bias. And are you going to advance the slides for me, Dimitri? Yeah. I shared this actually at the conference. I was in Salt Lake City at the conference. We both were last week, and there was a Q&A about bias. And I was reminded a few years ago, Jim Hitchner was sharing a story that he was speaking to a judge's panel, and was talking about being unbiased and objective in doing expert witness work. And one of the judges interrupted him, and he said, "Jim, when you walk into my courtroom, I already know that you're biased toward the people who have hired you. And I also know that the other expert is biased toward that side. My job is to figure out which one of you is the least biased." And when Jim shared that with me, I just said to him how sad this is, that we're in a profession that we're governed by so many rules and regulations that require us to be unbiased and objective. And yet so many times experts fall into the trap of being biased and not realizing that they are. And I've seen that more often than not in expert witness work. And so I decided this was a subject that we all needed to talk about as a profession so that we can realize, we do have bias and what can we do to deal with that. So I just kind of looked up some definitions to try to decide what bias means. And I think the Black's Law Dictionary really is the one that applies best to us, which is an advocate's bias. And that's a bias that's developed in favor of the client that's hired you or the side of the dispute that you're involved in. And it can cause you to misstep or overlook certain things, certain arguments that you need to. And as a result, your opinions become tainted by only looking at one side of the argument more so than the other. So I think the first step is to recognize that all of us have bias. I drive a certain type of car. I think that car is better than another type of car. That's a bias. I may feel that certain industries are more ethical than other industries. Let's say that I'm going to do some work in a business that's all cash. I already am thinking that they're not reporting all their income. Now, that might be wrong, but that's my bias. If I'm involved in a private equity dispute, and I've had prior experience with private equity firms that are good or that are bad, I've automatically got a bias that this engagement is going to be like that one. So there are 4 types of biases. The first one we'll talk about is anchoring. And anchoring can come from some of the things I just shared, where I have my own biases toward things that I prefer. Oftentimes it comes when we get that phone call from the attorney, and the attorney lays out their perspective on the claims of the case. Well, I'm only hearing one side of the story. And I'm already inclined to be thinking the way that they've shared the information to me when I start getting documents and I start reading through them. And so I have to be aware that I have already been anchored, in some way by what I have been told, and I have to work against that. You want to share availability?
Yeah, availability bias. It's what's most recent or familiar. So if you've worked on a case and it was a consulting business, for example, and you ran a capitalized cash flow model on it, and then you get another case that's a similar consulting business, you may just assume because you've recently done the same thing for another similar business that that's the right method to employ, but it may not be. A DCF may be more appropriate in that case. And so availability really just means what's most recently available, what's top of mind. We see this a lot in our work too. Me in particular, Greg and I are perfectly matched because he has an extensive experience that I don't have. So he has a much more deeper wealth of case experience that he can leverage. So a lot of times when I have cases come in and I say, hey, this is how I'm looking at approaching it, he'll challenge me and he'll say, what other methods could we consider? Because he has such a wealth of knowledge. So we work well together in that capacity.
Yeah, and that's one way to mitigate bias. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Another bias is confirmation bias. It's also can be called motivated reasoning, but in confirmation bias, you have a tendency as you're doing your work and you're beginning to form opinions, you'll give more weight to things that confirm what you already believe. And you'll give less weight to things that are against that, non-confirming information. And so it's important to be unbiased as we're doing our work and we come across some information that's not in line with what we think is going on. We shouldn't turn a dim eye to that. We should actually raise our attention and give more weight and give more consideration to non-conforming information, and that will help us to avoid bias. Overconfidence.
It's self-explanatory.
Yeah, we all testify. When we walk into the courtroom, you better be confident, or you're going to have a problem. And so all of us have to be confident in the work that we do, but you can be overconfident. And if you become overconfident, you're going to run into a problem that you won't anticipate something negative that could happen. In my experience, when I walk into court, I never know for sure what the other side's approach is going to be. I've formed my opinion. The attorney who's retained me, he and I or she have worked together, and we've developed the Q&A, the questions that he or she is going to ask me and how I'm going to respond. But I don't know what the cross-examination strategy is going to be. And if I assume that I've got it and I don't have a problem, then I could be surprised by something and not be able to handle it the way that I should. So to me, it's like everything that I do, every case that we work on, I have to earn my reputation on that case. I can lose it in a minute if I'm callous or overconfident. So overconfidence bias can be a problem for us at times.
I think of it like it gives you blind spots. Being overconfident is where you'll have blind spots.
Yeah, you can move on in the slides a little bit for us, Dimitri. Yeah, move past that.
Yeah, already covered.
Yeah, we just talked about confirmation bias. And so I think we have to be honest that, all of us can be overconfident and just be careful about that. What happens to us is why don't you share about these poor judgment tendencies, Rob?
Yes. So, and we're going to discuss this in more detail at our presentation at 4:00. But in general, the availability bias, as we've mentioned before, is just that tendency to rely on what's most recently available in your memory, what you've most recently experienced. And then the anchoring tendency is that you've already kind of made up your mind from just initial conversations or your previous, lived experience. So you're anchored in that as you begin a new engagement. And then confirmation is just seeking information that confirms what your hypothesis already is, as opposed to challenging yourself. And finally, the overconfidence is just that tendency to be overconfident in your own judgment.
So when you have this, as I say at the beginning, you have to recognize that you have bias. I think that's probably the first step that all of us need to take, is to admit we have our biases. And then if we do that, and we go through these processes of recognizing the ways that we can be biased, we can mitigate that. So in confirmation bias, we seek disconfirming information. I live in a world where when I testify, I believe there's a rock under a snake. And so if I don't pick up all the rocks, I'm going to get bit, and it's probably going to be at the most inopportune time. So we tend to be pretty thorough in looking at all the information we're giving, considering confirming and non-confirming information. To get away from anchoring, I bring Robin in, I bring in other people on our staff. I have them look at what I'm looking at, or Robin may If she's doing the bulk of the work, she'll bring me in to look at what she's looking at. We get other perspectives on the work we're doing to help us pull away from our anchors. Availability is, you can't just rely upon what you've done most recently. You have to consider every engagement as something new so that you don't overlook important information. And then overconfidence, the best way for me is to anticipate something bad happening. You know, getting in court and not being able to testify accurately, not being able to defend my opinions. You know, I like to try to attack myself once I have formed my opinions and put them into writing. I like to try to take the alternate approach and say, how would I attack myself? And that helps me not to be overconfident. What are the consequences of being biased? You can be excluded. You know, we have Rule 702. Recently, it was revised. I don't think much was changed substantively, but it brought to the surface to all the judges their duty to be a gatekeeper. And so in my experience and in the things that I'm reading from the marketplace, PricewaterhouseCoopers publishes information. I'm not sure. I know they did in 2016, and I think they did it again maybe in around 2020 or 2021. But they have statistics on experts being disqualified. And it's the financial experts, the economists, the CPAs, the valuators, the appraisers. They're the ones that are getting attacked the most, and they have the higher exclusion rates. And so we have to recognize that that's there, and bias is probably the most significant thing that would get us excluded. We can't be a higher
So great.
and we can't be perceived.
Unfortunately, we're really running out of time. Alina is already here.
I understand.
So, but
quick.
For everyone, I mean, there's a class right after this where Greg's going to go in depth in this subject, and I believe there's a ton of things to learn here. We are all really, I mean, this should concern all of us. This is great. Thank you so much, Greg. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Greg and Robin. And definitely, if this topic piqued your interest, you can join later another seminar. Shonda included the information on the chat, so you can register there. And now we are going to have our judges, and Melissa is talking to them, and they are going to be today about judging valuation, systematic insights every expert needs to hear. So, Melissa? Are you there, Melissa?
I am. I forgot to unmute myself. So we have Judge Driscoll and we have Judge Platt here. I don't know if Judge Yates is joining us, but I thought I'd scan through the presentation real quick, and then I'll put our faces a lot bigger so that you can see the judges really speak towards you. This week, we are going to kind of piggyback on what they had talked about during the conference, which was really about maybe how AI is coming into this, how we're perceiving things are changing. You know, a lot of what we discussed today was about bias and how, you know, experts are kind of seen to be a little bit biased. And so maybe you guys can give us a perspective of, you know, not only what you perceive as biased, but also, you know, how is AI changing the way lawyers lawyer and the way business valuation people value businesses, and what you are seeing changes in the current situation?
So we would call that a objection to the compound question, Melissa. So,
I know you guys can handle it, though.
So which question would you like us to start with?
I think first about bias, because we're talking a lot about bias. And, you know, I think that one of the things that we see is that there's a range of value. So one expert goes high, one expert goes low. And guess what? The judge is just going to split the baby anyway. So he's going to go in the middle. So how are we getting that wrong? And how do you look at bias And maybe where can you tell that there's bias after doing a lot of valuations, like maybe we're not getting away with it like we think we are.
So on that first, I just want to challenge the assumption that judges simply split the baby in the middle, right? I don't think I've ever said, all right, I got one expert saying 5 and another expert saying 10, and I'm just going to say 7.5. That would be, I don't want to say dereliction of duty, but it would trouble me to do that. And I don't believe, I'm almost certain I never have without any analysis behind it. So I don't know. I don't think that's as, yeah, you all know better than me, but I don't think it's as big of a concern as might be in the popular literature that said judges simply split the baby. In terms of
any judge that does that is falls into the category of LJ, lazy judges.
That's called family law.
And often,
And
family
we're not,
law.
and none of this panel meets that, are in that group.
and also possibly RJ or MJ, which is reverse judge or modified judge, or FMJ, frequently modified or frequently reversed. So I guess I'm resisting the premise of the question, but I understand it. I understand that, if a judge is handling, 30 cases in a day, well, he might have a shorthand for how to make it through the cases, which fortunately I don't have that that conflict or that hassle, if you will, because the job of the docket of a commercial division judge in New York is about 40% of that of his sisters and brothers, and I think that's the case in most states. In terms of bias, so this is where I'm gonna quote a great authority, and that's my friend Judge Platt, and that is to don't forget that you're not an advocate. The advocates are advocates. The lawyers are lawyers. They are well, again, to use the popular literature phrase, the hired gun, which they're not. They're skilled advocates for their position, but they are the ones who can go out on a limb. They are the ones who can say, this is absolutely correct, Your Honor. You can't do that, as we say at basketball games, right? You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. You have to be an advocate, if you will, for the wisdom of your methodology and the wisdom of your result. But if you look like you're squaring your shoulders and that you want someone to win, oh boy, you're not doing your job, and also you're putting yourself potentially in harm's way, in that you're giving the judge almost no choice but to say that expert Anthony Jones presented himself as more of an advocate than as a dispassionate expert. The court is compelled to reject his methodology, in that on cross-examination he bristled at every point. And don't take this personally, right? Experts, this is what you do. This isn't who you are. So don't take it personally when you're being challenged on cross or being challenged with the judge's questions or at any point where someone's questioning your methodology. That doesn't change that all you'd want to do is go home and kiss your spouse and your children. So again, don't be an advocate, I guess would be the starting point.
You're muted, Judge.
You're muted, Steve. Steve, you're muted.
Along with not being an advocate is, again, know who you are trying to persuade and know all about them. And trying to persuade a business court judge is very different than trying to persuade somebody who doesn't do that regularly, who doesn't deal with these issues regularly. And to the extent you can hire Dr. Bull or somebody like him that researches judges, and because the more you know about who you're trying to persuade, and I know, to go back to what Judge Driscoll said, I don't think he's ever done that. Neither have I. But I'm a mediator, so I suffer from the mediators. The conventional wisdom is we're just trying to settle the case. So if you go one's high and one's low, then we're just going to split it. But that's not how you settle cases in high stakes commercial litigation. Nobody's there to do that. And they're not going to do that. And if you think that, then but again, who are you trying to persuade? You're trying to persuade a trained, educated business judge who's been doing this for years, or you're trying to persuade an arbitrator who was selected not by you but by some court? Are you trying to know how they got where they are and why they're doing the fact finding and in some cases the judgment? or the arbitrator, in a case of an arbitrator and award, if you're trying to settle the case, you're looking for the expert to conduct a range of risk, essentially a risk analysis. A risk analysis is very different than a straight out opinion on value. And I may have misread it, and I didn't read the whole thing, which is a little dangerous to talk about something that you haven't read completely, especially when you're lecturing to people and telling them don't do what I'm just saying I'm about to do. But Judge Driscoll may be better to comment on this than me, but my understanding is the reversal of the award in the New York case against the Trump organization was that there was some calculation that part of the reversal was based on a valuation technique being disputed, and disputed on the basis of the fact that since there wasn't a complaint, it's not worth as much as the expert said it was. That judge, as I understand it, chose about, his number was not out of nowhere. He was basing it on, he thought, on the evidence. But what apparently he wasn't doing was basing it on some evidence that the appellate court thought he should have considered and given more weight to than he did, and it's back for that reason. Or if I don't, and again, Judge Driscoll may know more about that or have read more about it than I did, but that's what I read an article about it, so I'll leave it at that for the time being. If you can clarify it, that'd be great.
Well, I wish I could, but my First Amendment rights are minimal.
Are minimal, yes, exactly. I understand. Well,
yeah.
I don't have that. Okay, so
Yeah.
but again, that's an example of knowing who you're talking to and knowing who they're going to be talking to and knowing who else is going to be looking at it. But you're not there as an advocate. You're there to assist the trial court. And it's not a bad idea to listen to what the other side is saying and their expert, because the judge is going to not split the baby if he or she knows what is comfortable in their role. They're going to be basing their verdict or their award or whatever you want to call it, and depending on the kind of proceeding it is, on evidence.
Absolutely, but
And so anyone who thinks, well, I got to go high, that's even true, by the way, in negotiations. Okay. I mean, I must have said to lawyers, I don't say it to experts, but they get experts to say what they want them to say. Hiring counsel wants you to inflate the value.
Oops, I think he froze. So that parlays into a good point, though, with bias. Like if I'm doing what I know is correct, like I am educating, I'm educating the judge, I'm educating the court. I think I've looked at the financials in the proper way. If the other expert is biased and comes back with a zero value and I'm at a couple million, the implication of that other expert is that, well, something must be wrong because there's such a discrepancy in the valuations. And at this point, how do I recover? Yes, I understand I need to present it in a reasonable fashion, but not all judges are as educated as both of you are about the business valuations, or we have new judges that are cycling in.
Right.
And that is a difficult position where the other hired gun makes the regular, expert look a little jaded as well. So how do you deal with something like that?
You have a good
Well,
lawyer.
I think that let the lawyer deal with it first of all. But the question also comes back, and it was raised in the chat feature about do judges believe that everyone is biased? I wouldn't say biased, but everybody has a perspective. Everybody has a background. I guess you're biased if all you did was plaintiff's work or all you did was defendant's work. Then I might have some concern. If all you did was work for a certain lawyer, then I might expect that lawyer is paying your mortgage. But short of that, the question then becomes, Melissa, well, what are your qualifications and what is your methodology? It really is a 702 analysis more than it's a bias. Bias, as Greg just suggested in the earlier panel and has been suggested throughout, is a an implicit bias or an explicit bias, a view of how we view the world. We all have those. But in terms of methodology, if you have a methodology that is fundamentally flawed, I think that's the bigger concern than the bias. I haven't seen too many experts who I feel are biased. And by my definition, which is, again, either you're always working for the plaintiff, you're always working for the defendant, you've never met a valuation above $100 that you've ever liked. That would concern me more. I don't see that as much. I see methodology problems, and I see methodology problems with assumptions. Just as one example, I remember one case I was valuing a convenience store attached to a gas station, and the evaluator was saying, well, this convenience store that would just be a white box is much more valuable than an existing convenience store with a track record. I said I said, how can that be? How can that be that you're saying a white box that has never existed before, where you're making all these assumptions about traffic and who's going in and who's going out, that your methodology is better, which is just based on, I don't know, the equivalent of Pratt stats for gas station convenience stores, that's more valuable than what I know about an existing business at a location. And I just shook my head and I said, counsel, come on back. You're not getting anywhere with this guy. But that wasn't bias. That was just, you're not getting through to me. So I think that's more the concern on our end. That's more the concern that we regularly face, I believe.
Yeah, and we may need to do a better job at educating how the other expert is biased if we believe that is true. Now,
Absolutely.
What if I come in and I say, hey, my whole report is written by AI and I'm just here to kind of testify about the methodologies? Like, I think that the law community has scared the bejeebers out of the lawyers. Like, they don't want to use AI at all. But like experts, like, how do you feel like if AI is involved in this, where does that make me less biased? Does that make me less credible? Where are your thoughts on introducing that as part of the process?
It's you, Melissa, because it's you testifying. You might have done all the work based on AI, but it's you and your credibility. I get that you use AI, just like I get that you use a phone or a calculator or something like that to make calculations if you don't want to add things up in your head. I got that, but you're owning it. You're signing the report that it's yours. So I don't want to hear. If you want to say I got this through AI, sure, no problem. Or if you're confronted with that by opposing counsel, Miss Gragg, did you use AI? Yes, I did, attorney with foolish question. And the report is all mine. I'm adopting every bit of it because every bit of it is mine and my own conclusion, and I own it. And square your shoulders with that, because that's a question that I would find so just pedestrian if that were asked.
And the prep, especially not because they even used AI, but because take a look at the opposing. It's not like you don't know what the opposing expert's going to say. It's the attorney's job to get with you to know how to combat that, starting with a voir dire if methodology is the problem. But even and again, I don't see the connection either. The connection between AI and bias is not direct for sure. And anyone who makes that argument is probably going to fall on deaf ears or ignorant ears, one way or the other. It's like, why you? And in fact, if somebody like me looks at it and says that if that's the best you can do, then maybe you're desperate, okay? and that does not add to your credibility. But it's the lawyer's responsibility to do that. And hiring counsel, it can't be lazy.
Sure. Michael, I know you've joined, so do you have some thoughts on what we're talking about here?
Oh, do I have thoughts? My first thought is our judges have given us just outstanding perspectives, outstanding direction. There are a few things that I want to point out and I want to underscore here. When you walk into the courtroom as an expert, you should never, ever lose sight of who your client is. You are there to serve your client. And if it's a bench trial, your client is the judge. If it's a jury trial, your clients are the judge and the jurors. Never lose sight of that. You don't want to, you don't want to be biased or appear biased to one side or the other. When you deliver your testimony, assuming you're dealing with the same evidence, whether you're on one side or the other, if you're dealing with the same evidence and dealing with the same the same business, the same methodology, the same economy, the same environment, your number, regardless of which side you're on, be it plaintiff or defendant, should be really close, if not the same. Never lose sight of the fact that you need to be unbiased. Now, AI has got us all running scared. How do we use AI and how are we going to deal with it when we're in the courtroom, we're sitting on a stand and opposing counsel asks us, is this the product of AI or is this your own work? When I walked into my office this morning, I walked up to the coffee machine. I get a triple espresso topped off with an Americano. Really gets me going. There was a young man who was 24 years old standing at the coffee machine, and I had never met him before, and I introduced myself, and I asked him, so what do you do professionally? He said, I'm in the AI industry. I work for a startup, and we're developing AI platforms. And I talked to him a little bit about it, and a little bit about the challenges that we have in the valuation arena and the financial forensics arena. And he looked at me, he said, one thing people miss about AI, one thing that they don't seem to grasp as well as they should, and that is you can only use AI between the 20-yard lines. Taking the ball from the goal line to the 20, that's all you. That's all you. You've got to plan it out. You've got to create the plan, the approach, the prompts. You've got to engineer them appropriately. You let the AI take it from the 20 to the other 20, and then you take over. You take that ball back. You take the ball back and you inject your professional judgment into it. And that is critical. That is critical. One of the things that, that I believe is that as experts, and keep in mind, I've been in this business more than 50 years. 50 years ago, last month, I gave my first 49 years ago, I gave my first expert testimony, but 50 years ago, I got into the financial forensics industry. And in my mind, it's evolved, or my involvement has evolved to the point where I will challenge everything that I do along the way. I am going to challenge my assumptions. I'm going to challenge my assumptions. What's wrong? Where did I go wrong? Where did I go right? What about other assumptions? What are the assumptions that the guy on the other side is going to have? I will challenge my assumptions. I will challenge my evidence. Did I have the same deck of evidence that the guy on the other side had? Did I have all the evidence that I needed? You know how sometimes you'll see an expert get on the stand and testify, well, I base my opinions on all the documents made available to me. Well, did you ask for other documents? No, I just took what counsel gave me and I did my analysis. Well, you've got to drive that train. And when you drive the train, you challenge the evidence. Do I have enough evidence? Do I have sufficient relevant data? Is there something out there that I should be getting that I haven't been getting? You've got to challenge all of that.
I think we could use AI to challenge, and we could be like, hey, AI, how am I balanced or biased in my report?
Right. We have, in fact, one of the things that we talked about in our session was that's the best place to use AI because you have to explain less when you're in the courtroom. Do your work the way you always do it. Develop your analysis, formulate your opinions, write your report, then take it and stick it in the AI platform and say, where did I go wrong? What did I miss? Is there other evidence? Is there something? Where am I weak? Where am I strong? What's wrong with this? And that is where you use AI. Use it as a devil's advocate. Use it to challenge everything that you did. And I'll tell you something, after you do that, you're going to walk out of there with a much better product, a much stronger opinion, and you'll have more of a comfort level when you're sitting on the witness stand. How about this question? What is opposing counsel planning on doing with me in terms of cross-examining me? How should my retaining counsel present me? What are the questions that he or she should be asking so I can give my best testimony and the most persuasive testimony? So there's so much we can do with it, but that's going to happen between the 20-yard lines.
We don't envy you being that reliant on the legal profession.
This was a great segment. I agree with Mary. This was a great conversation, and Michael, you topped it off really well with, you know, how should we be using this in a way that strengthens us and doesn't weaken us at trial. So thank you all, Melissa and Judge Driscoll, Judge Platt, and Michael, for being part of this and helping us out in this time where everyone seems to be freaking out, and maybe we shouldn't be.
If Judge Yates had been here, by the way, he would have agreed with everything Judge Driscoll and I said.
He wouldn't agree with what I said?
Yes, definitely you, Michael.
Oh.
Awesome, y'all. Thank you.
Take care.
We're going to move on to our next session with Nick Mears. Nick is part of our standards board. He's going to give us an update on standards, what we need to be thinking about now, and everything. So, Nick, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Can you hear me okay?
You're good.
Wonderful. And I'm with the ethics board. I was previously on the standards board many years ago. And I was the prior chair of the Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Commission. I'm still an active advisor there. And we've written a lot of publications, a lot of guidance on artificial intelligence, particularly how to use it, more importantly, how not to use it. But there's been some really interesting conversations that have been picking up here recently. One of mine was a personal matter. I was hired in a litigation context, and I'm very familiar with artificial intelligence, not only the plug-in with the Artificial Intelligence Machine Learning Commission, but I've been using it for a few years and been really honing it in on valuation. Well, in a recent engagement, I had a client start using artificial intelligence on my work product. And I found it fascinating because it was the first actual instance where I saw a questionnaire list come back after I had issued a report. And I was hired as a neutral expert in a divorce matter in Texas. And when I got a list of questions back from the non-owning spouse, it was pretty obvious really quickly within 3 questions getting submitted back that this was AI generated questions. And at first I chuckled to myself, and then I went down my normal deep rabbit hole of worry and started thinking about the amount of problems that we're going to start seeing in here, not only liability for myself, but also liability for attorneys that are involved, liability for the actual business owner involved. So I decided I was going to write a quick read article about this that'll be published pretty soon. And I also brought this forth to the AIMLC, and I think the standards board and the ethics board are going to start considering some of this language of how we can take precautions going forward, because you just can't control what somebody else is going to do. I think that's just a normal facet. A lot of the times you might find your evaluation report that was used in a matrimonial matter now getting used for an SBA loan, and that wasn't the actual intent. So right now, AI is no longer just a topic for webinars or for conference panels. Now it's a part of our daily interaction with our clients. So on the positive side, there's some good that comes out of this. And some of this good is that it sparks a new level of curiosity with the clients. Complex valuation concepts can be explained at a much more basic level that help the clients engage more fully in that entire process. And it creates an opportunity to explain that methodologies in ways that it really resonates with them. Because often, especially in these instances, whether it's a neutral case like the one I'm hired in, or if it's a straight collaborative, the opposing counsel or the opposing counsel's client's going to get that, and they're going to try to start making some sense out of this, and they're going to want to understand some of these theories, maybe even if they don't have their own expert yet. It can improve that client review process. When I told members of the IMLC about what had happened, they thought maybe my intent was I didn't want clients using it, and that wasn't actually my intent at all. When a report clearly lays out all the assumptions, AI can grab or generate some of the clarifying questions on the assumptions that you made. And that's fantastic. The problems are in litigation. We have some reporting exemptions, and maybe all of those assumptions aren't always laid out. So the good parts for some of these takeaways are really just it can help clients explain some of those intricate problem area issues, and it can help that client in that review process, and it can provide an opportunity to reinforce trust with the client, especially when you've done the right thing, you've gone above and beyond where you really need to go in explaining your methodologies. Now, that's not without some bad. Some of these bad things could be that the AI reviews itself. On that next slide, it can create some false confidence, some hallucinations. One limitation is that those AI generated outputs may contain errors. The formulas that it cites are inconsistent. It can fabricate its own sources, as we know, in those hallucinations to justify AI's position against the expert. It can oversimplify some of the assumptions while giving the appearance of authority. And clients really need to note that the AI process, not the AI process, but the AI processes documents in a chunking manner, meaning that when a client starts interacting with a evaluation report, it doesn't read the report from beginning to end and then start reading the schedules and say, oh yeah, the report talked about these adjustments in the adjustment section, and here's the schedule for the adjustments. Now that's something that Mel may do or Michael Kaplan may do whenever they're reviewing a report. Probably they have the report and the schedules side by side and they're actually reviewing them. AI doesn't do that. AI will actually read headers, and it prioritizes certain headers over another. And schedules, it doesn't even read in the same way that it does your report. So it may even disregard some of the schedules, even if those explain some of your assumptions. So some of these bad things is how AI reads the report, and it can really distort what the client seemed to believe a comprehensive review. There's this artificial or LLM software that's out there, and it's been trained on everything that's ever been written in all time. And surely it's got to be smarter than the expert. So it creates this client hallucination, if you will, that AI is now smarter than the expert. And if the expert starts pushing back, it can give the presence as if you're lying, which can create a serious problem. These aren't the problems that I was primarily concerned about. I was concerned most about with that one at the bottom about sensitive data. Now, in the questions that came in to me from that client, it was obvious that and I'm not calling the client a liar, but it was obvious that the client had taken my report and uploaded it up to ChatGPT. Now, when I asked the client, did you use ChatGPT? It looks like these were automated, but I'll be happy to answer these questions. When I had asked that client that specific question, I was aimed at client sensitivity. ChatGPT and other softwares update their programs fairly frequently. Sometimes they're quarterly or semi-annually. And what I'm afraid of is I'll be able to type that name of that business in ChatGPT 6 months from now and ask it, what are the top 5 customers that make up this company? How many employees do they have? Where are all their services? What's their revenue and profitability? How much does the owner make? These are some serious issues that people have to now struggle with and not just making sure that your data as the analyst is remaining confidential, but making sure that it's actually not being used for any other purpose by any other person or software. So whenever I started coming across this question about how do we control this and what do we do, and what do we do moving forward? And I've got some tips on the next slides about moving forward. And the client may believe that AI, one, could be more smarter than the actual professional, but we actually have to start educating the clients maybe about some of what the pitfalls are. Yes, absolutely. We want you to use these tools, but we also have to educate them on how to turn some of these features on. When you use ChatGPT or Gemini, which is a Google product, things like that, they're already trained to start sharing your data and using your correspondence, your prompts, your dialogue to train future models. So you have to go into the security settings. And if you don't know how, you'd have to Google it or Bing it or whatever search engine you would want to, and find out how to make sure that that information is private. Have those communications with your attorney. Make sure that their clients or the opposing client and their the opposing expert, or not the opposing expert, the opposing counsel's client is aware that there are these tools that are out there, and there are safety features to take into account. I started drafting some language that's right now getting circulated to the AIMLC, and it'll start going up to the various boards for review. Some of this language, the intent is for you to be able to put a placeholder in your report or in your assumptions and limiting conditions. And I know that there's no safe harbor in the world that's going to protect us from a client misuse or misunderstanding of AI. But the goal of some of this language, either in the assumptions and limiting conditions and or the engagement letter, is to help shield some of that responsibility. When this specific case came across me and I finished that report and I got these questions back from ChatGPT, the very first thing I did was call the attorney and say, there were some questions that came in from ChatGPT. I've already answered them for the client. I wanted to get a quick response back, but there's a deeper issue here. I said, if that client had uploaded that report and did not turn off any of those safety features, who's responsible? Me, you, or them? And I started thinking about real life examples. If in 6 months I type that customer name, that business name into ChatGPT, and I get some answers like what their last 5 years of revenue and profitability were, I asked the attorney, I said, who's actually legally responsible? Because we're supposed to live in a system where you're free until proven, or you're innocent until proven guilty. I said, but in reality, what's going to happen is somebody's going to get a lawsuit, and it'll probably be the business owner saying somebody breached my my security. They didn't keep my information confidential. They're going to come to me first. Luckily, with my engagement letter, I already have confidentiality clauses. They may ask, did you use ChatGPT for my valuation? What happens if I did? Maybe I kept my prompts. Maybe this is a 6-month-old case. Maybe those prompts have been deleted. Should we keep all of our prompts as a safety feature, as a backstop? Improving who actually uploaded it, I learned, is probably going to be one of the more challenging issues. So some of the takeaways I have for you is make sure that if you are using it for a client and you're not using a grounded AI source like Copilot, where you own all that data and it's not going to be publishing it, you may want to keep track of the different AI features that you're using out there. You may even want to keep a running log of the AI prompts that you're using. Keep those somewhere else, because if a client misuses that data, you're going to need to end up trying to prove your innocence. And again, keep an eye out here pretty soon. I've got the quick read article that's going to be published. There hopefully should be some guidance coming out pretty soon that'll start out from the AIMLC, working its way up through the standards board, and on the NACVA website. There's a section that you can look at the template engagement letters, and the idea is to include that there somewhere for your engagement letters, or a template paragraph that you can include with your assumptions and limiting conditions. There's some additional resources that are in these slides. There's one that about should AI be disclosed, that's already been out there, and there's an advisory brief that's already been published that came out from the AI MLC while we were there about best case uses and things that you should do. So that's all that I have for y'all today. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Nick. And now we are going to have Mr. Alan Zipp. He's going to be interviewing David Fein and Mark Roberts, and they are going to be talking about the sink water. Alan.
Thank you very, very much. I'm trying to share my screen. There we go. David Fein is CEO of ValueSource. And that is a really wonderful thing for us because he's been leading a company that specializes in automating the valuation process for over 40 years. Now, David, from that vantage point, can you tell us what you have learned about how automation has changed valuation, where you see it going next? What does automation really mean in the context of business valuation? And why should valuators care about it? And also focus on areas where we should not automate and how they can identify the tasks that are best suited for automation. Now, I know that's a compound question. I'm going to let you just talk because you've got great slides. Thank you.
You want to put up the first slide?
I do.
Well, thank you, Alan. Yes, ValueSource started 40 years ago, which is kind of exciting and a bit scary. It's been a long time, and obviously we've come a long way. ValueSource's primary mission was to help automate the process of business valuation. In those days, it was sort of the wild, wild west. People were obviously always using spreadsheets. When we started, our first product was a Lotus 1A spreadsheet with macros in it. So that's what we were doing. So what we've seen, both as the community has evolved and we've evolved, obviously technology has been key in that whole thing. And I think there's two things that we're really primarily looking at, and I think valuators are looking at. One is to make things faster, easier, smarter, more consistent. But another piece of that is really to enhance insight and enhance results. It's not just make things, faster, but I think that smarter piece is also key. So our software has obviously evolved an incredible amount over the last 40 years. And, we've gone from a Lotus 1A template to a fully integrated platform that handles the three pieces of valuation. And every valuator has to deal with this. There's an analysis piece, which you think about as a spreadsheet. There's the data integration, which is a bunch of individual databases, but you need to find a way to analyze those things and then incorporate them into your valuation. And then there's the report. You have to tie all those things together. So those are sort of the three components. And obviously, AI has come onto the scene in full force. Nick was just on here talking about AI, and that's another component. Although I think, although AI is sort of an incredible game changer, we need to just, sort of compartmentalize that and look and say, where can AI help? How does it help automate? And the other things we've noticed too is as the tools have improved, valuators have improved their use of them. One of the things that I will say, and we'll talk about this a little more, is that, it's just like all software. We tend to use the stuff that we must learn and use to get our job done, but there's so much more. If you look at things like Excel and Word, they're so deep and there's so many options just in the normal user interface of both those tools that most of us are not using, let alone things like enhanced formulas, VBA and all that, and we'll sort of talk about that. But I think, valuation is really important, or automation is really important for valuators, because I think there's two things. One is, once again, we do want to increase speed. I was talking to Ninesh Shah at the recent NACFA conference in Salt Lake City, and I was asking him about his approach on valuation and automation. And his approach is pretty sophisticated and pretty aggressive. His whole perspective is, if something is repetitive, let's automate it. Why waste time doing things that you can have a piece of software do for you automatically. But once again, I think speed is one piece. Automation helps credibility, it helps accuracy. It also helps staff utilization too. If things are automated, you can sort of give different pieces of evaluation to someone you may not if it's not automated. That's a clear thing that we've seen over the years for people using our software and not. And I'll give you an example. I think we have a case study on this. Greg Crusoe uses our software, and at one point he got an engagement where he had to value 17 Popeyes restaurants in 7 days. I don't remember why he had to do it so quickly, but because he had it automated. And once again, I know some people use our software, some people don't. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, how is your process? Do you have a process that is automated? Do you have a workflow that's automated? But anyway, back to Greg and the Popeyes. He did 17 separate valuations in 7 days, which would have been completely impossible if it wasn't automated in some way. Now, once again, he happened to be using our software, but you can automate in other ways. So I think that's an example of the power of automation. And let me say this too, I think one of the most powerful things about automation, like Ninesh was saying, he wants to automate things that are repetitive or time consuming. But there's a byproduct of that, which I think is one of the most powerful byproducts of this whole idea of automation, which is, evaluator has expertise in judgment, which is the core of where what I would say a quality evaluation comes from. Being able to put in financial statements faster doesn't necessarily give you a better valuation. But if you can automate those tasks that are redundant and repetitive and are not adding value to the valuation, I call it ditch digging, then you really can make a difference. If you can free up your time to spend more time doing what you've been trained to do and where all of your experience is, that can make a huge difference. So you asked about what not to automate. I think clearly the things not to automate are your expertise, judgment, and reasoning. You do not want whatever process you're using, and our software clearly doesn't do that either. We're not automating those things. We're giving you an automated workflow, and then you are using your judgment and your reasoning to make assumptions and draw conclusions. So I think that's sort of a very important piece. The other thing to think about is, how do you identify things to automate? And let me say this too. I'd like to broaden the idea of automate. I think when we think automate or talk automate, we automatically talk about software. But I would say if you have a good checklist in your process and in your practice, especially if you have more than one valuator, that's a way to automate. It doesn't necessarily have to be software. So anything that's repetitive, high frequency, time consuming, error prone, those are things to look at. But once again, look at areas where you want to increase the valuation quality itself, like reducing time, or there's ways you can analyze, or there are ways you can use AI to do that. It makes sense. So my lens is, our sort of mantra here is better valuations in less time. I think that should be everybody's, sort of focus. How do I get a better valuation and spend less time doing it? You also asked where automation is headed. Automation clearly is headed, into the way beyond. If you haven't read Ray Kurzweil's latest book, The Singularity is Near, it will not only blow your mind, but give you a roadmap into the sci-fi of where AI is going, automation is going, and obviously that bleeds over into valuation. But I would also say automation is headed in more mundane things like valuators learning the tools that they're currently using in a much better and deeper way.
David, every evaluator uses financial statements. What are the key areas where a evaluator can consider automation? And as examples, can you tell us how your software tools can help automate that valuation process?
Sure. If you look at every evaluator has to get financials, into an Excel spreadsheet some way. So when we're talking about points of automation, and once again, I think we need to look at that entire spectrum. In other words, how well are you using Excel? Is your Excel spreadsheet, sophisticated enough? If you're using a better Excel spreadsheet, you're automating it to a better level. So let's start at the beginning. Like, where's the source of your data? Is it in an Excel spreadsheet? Is it a PDF that was printed out from, some company's QuickBooks? Is it a tax return? And then how are you going to get that into your model, however you created that model? Now, there's a whole bunch of tools out there today. So, the question is there an automation point there? do you buy a tool to do that? Do you do it yourself? For example, if you have an Excel spreadsheet, can you somehow match it to your Excel model? That's obviously an important point. Now obviously you can just type it in. So typing it in is the lowest level of automation. You can buy a tool that will bring in a PDF file and tag things. But one of the tricks you need to think about is, if you have an Excel model with some chart of accounts, financial statements, and you're bringing something in, how do you match it? Like, how do you match the financials that you're bringing into your model? And once again, that's an absolute point where you can automate, but you have to look at sort of the ROI. How much time and energy is it going to spend you to automate versus how much time is it going to take you just to put it in? The next step in that process is making normalizing adjustments. So, once again, there's room in here to automate. And let me just say this again, it's really not just automation at a high level like using AI. It could be something simple like using Excel in a creative or more thoughtful way or a more robust way. Excel has changed a lot in the last 5 years. They've added a lot of stuff to it. Most of us have not spent the time to learn. I think that's important. So calculating trends, for example, if you want to analyze those financial statements, once again, that's something that everyone has to do. Can you build better Excel formulas? Can you put some conditional formatting on there to highlight things? Can you draw some conclusions just using Excel formulas that will help you out to make it smarter, make it better, make it faster, and also make it so that someone that maybe not a high-level evaluator can look at that and take a first crack at it. The next thing that people do is benchmark against financial statement data. RMA is one example. So how do you do that? How do you set up that spreadsheet? Once again, there's a lot of ways to do it. Can you use some Excel, sophistication to make that better? Once again, conditional formatting. Can you have some conclusions that are drawn from you? How do you do that? And maybe for RMA, for the analysis, you upload that into AI and get back some answers and some things that it can help you with. Once again, there's a lot of things that you can do from a checklist all the way to AI, and you have to look in that process and figure out what makes sense. Also,
can you walk us through some of that progression from basic Excel tricks to some more advanced Excel and things like VBA and even AI? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, sure. And let me just say this back on that last one. The last piece is you have to integrate all that into your reports. You want to keep that in mind. So simple Excel is just the basic Excel formulas. What I'd like everyone to do is, rate your current model on a scale from 1 to 10. Like where is your model in terms of just, how well are you using Excel? How sophisticated is it? Have you spent some time on it? I've heard valuators have spent an incredible amount of time on their models. I also know some valuators, they do just enough with Excel to get the job done, and they're always so busy they don't have time. So once again, where do you want your model to be? Can you be smarter about it? Do you need to learn more about Excel? I would say that's a big yes with lots of exclamation points. And once again, you can use AI to do that too. You can upload your models into AI and say, can you give me some tips? Can you help me make this better, more sophisticated, and give it some goals that'll help you? So simple Excel formulas is number one. More advanced Excel, things like mapping financials with tags, using conditional formatting, naming cells and ranges, dynamic formulas I'd encourage every evaluator to use because they can be really powerful. That specific example, your spreadsheet has between 2 and 5 years of input. Well, how do you handle that in doing things like trends or creating standardized financial statements that fit into the rest of your model? If you're doing a lot of manual work to make that happen, dynamic formulas can be incredible. My guess is many evaluators don't know about dynamic formulas. Using some basic Excel things like dynamic data validation and lists. There's also form controls, which many people don't use. It's on the developer tab. You can do all sorts of incredible stuff with form controls. You can put, checkboxes, radio buttons, drop downs, all that stuff. It's very simple to learn, probably 30 minutes with ChatGPT, and you'll be, pretty fluent in all that stuff. And then you can go to full VBA. Visual Basic for Applications is an incredible tool. I'm not suggesting people become experts in that, but if you learn the basics, you'd be blown away by what you can do. And then there's the whole level of Excel add-ins. There's commercial add-ins that can do that, and then Excel consultants. And then obviously there's AI. AI can do pieces of all of this, classification of accounts that you're bringing in, trends and benchmark commentary. You could have Excel, and I think Nick did a whole webinar on this, how do you use AI to do a review of your entire report? And then obviously, there's things like tools like ours, BVM Pro and SyncWarrior, that automate the entire process to help you figure that out.
And I've lost control. Sorry. Well, there it goes. Let me see if I can get it back. There we go. The strategy, the last slide. Can you give us some general strategy that we can use? We have less than a minute.
Sure. Start small, automate repetitive stuff that's error prone, and stuff where you want more intelligence. I would say layer up. In other words, start easy, move from formulas. And I would spend a little bit of time, just learning more about Excel and more about Excel data analysis. Learn a little bit about VBA. Obviously, AI is huge. And then there's the full Excel to Word automation. There's all sorts of ways to do that. I would say most people are underutilizing both Excel as a platform as well as full Excel automation quite a bit. And remember, you want to balance here. Automation doesn't replace judgment. It's going to amplify your judgment and give you more clarity to make better judgments. And future-proof, obviously, AI is gigantic. I think everyone is saying AI is not going to replace you, but someone that's using AI better than you will replace you. So I think it's crucial to figure that out. I would say my homework for all of you today is review your entire process and pick a single thing that you want to make better that you can automate either using formulas, advanced formulas, VBA, AI, or whatever, and just put that on your schedule every so often. Spend some time reviewing your work. Stephen Covey would say, sharpen the saw as a valuator, and you'll come up with better valuations in less time.
David Fein, thank you so very, very much for a short time, but a great deal of information. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Alan and David, for that presentation. And for everyone else, it was great having you during this month show. And hopefully we'll see you next month, October 20th, in another show. So see you then. Bye-bye.